Mini episode 1538 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1538. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris here, and I have a very special panel for you for the 2022 World Series. We have two of our favorite FDH Lounge dignitaries, and both of them have done an awful lot of broadcasting over a period of time with our good friend Steve Callis, fellow FDH Lounge dignitary. Ken Detwiler, I used to sidekick for him, of course, back at the old Sports Talk Network. Life's a Pitch with Ken Detwiler. What a fun show that always was, and we've carried it over here to the lounge where Ken has been a regular contributor over a period of time, more often than not on baseball. And we have done a lot of segments over a period of time, a lot of roundtables with Steve Callis. And so Ken is somebody that, of course, we just recently did one going into the 2022 postseason. So always a pleasure to get him back on. Kenny D, so happy to have you here, my man.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing the Philly perspective from Joe and other perspectives. So this is going to be fun.
It is going to be indeed, and that brings us to my man, fellow FDH Lounge dignitary, Joe Staszak, a longtime veteran over the decades of TV and radio in the Philadelphia area, and somebody who is uniquely qualified to come in here and give the perspective and tell us about some of the things on the ground, some of the things happening with the Phillies here that the rest of us might not be hip to. I'm always a big believer that when you're talking to somebody in a local market, you get a perspective that nobody else has, and we're counting on that. I know we're going to get it, as well as the usual wit and wisdom from my man, Joe Staszak. Always a pleasure to bring him back in. He's sitting in for Steve Callis here tonight. Joe, so grateful and glad to have you on, my man.
Hey, always great to be here, guys. Looking forward to it. This town was shaking a few days ago. It's calmed down a little bit, but kind of like the calm before the storm. We're ready to rock and roll again.
Well, let's start there, because this is a thing where, again, from the outside, I'm getting a lot of vibes as far as the unexpected nature of this. You look at the upset in the '93 National League Championship Series against the Braves, and that was a team that was on a roll, and a lot of people said, hey, maybe a team of destiny or whatever, and they ran up against Toronto in the World Series, who was a juggernaut at that time, maybe kind of similar to what Houston is right now. So talk about that. Is that just like a surface comparison here, looking back at 29 years ago?
No, it's actually, well, here's the difference, and not a bad comparison. I was just hanging out with the '93 team. My friend runs the Darren Dalton Foundation for brain cancer. We had a golf outing. Most of the '93 guys were there. It was funny seeing them. They were total jerks back in '93. They're very nice guys nowadays. But I love to watch total jerks. I was hanging out with Schilling, couldn't stand him back in the day, but any big game I'd have, I'd like to have him on the hill. But it was fun. We had a nice time, raised a lot of money. But here's the difference between those two, because I compare them kind of, again, until things are complete and the book is written on this season, we don't know. But they ran into a juggernaut in the Toronto Blue Jays, like you're right, like you said, who ended up winning back-to-back World Series. That team, though, was good. That team went wire to wire that year. '93 was wire to wire, first place. There was no doubt about it. And then, they kind of, they beat the Braves in 6 games again with Maddox and Glavine and, that whole Schmaltz and Steve Avery. And then they stumbled in Game 4. They had Game 4-1. They were up 6 runs in the 8th inning, and then Mitch Williams started pitching batting practice. And they lost that game, turned the series around. They still almost took it to Game 7. We know what happened with Joe Carter. This team, not very good all year. 87 wins. In fact, these two teams, this World Series is a 19-game disparity, which is the biggest in World Series history since 1906. It's that much of a difference. This team did not play great most of the year. They really, though, kind of flipped a switch when Joe Girardi was let go in May. Rob Thompson, who was Girardi's, right-hand man a long time in New York, took over, and they really started playing ball. They actually played better when Harper went out with the elbow injury, but then they struggled down the stretch like they have in the past few Septembers, and everyone was just off the bandwagon. And I know some of my colleagues at the station were like, even if they get in, limp in, and Milwaukee doesn't keep losing to the Marlins, which they were doing at home, they're like, we hate this team. This team is this team is that. Of course, that changed once they got in, and I think the biggest catalyst was the 9th inning 6-run output in St. Louis. That kind of gave them a charge, kind of like, wait, you know what? Maybe they had no runs up until that point, and Aaron Nola pitched the gem. They won 6-2. They went on to sweep that series, and they kind of gelled. You see that happen a lot. Like the Nationals, came together a few years ago, made a run. The Braves last year, the 2011 Cardinals that were 10.5 games out in August that year, beat the Phillies. Chris Carpenter versus Roy Halladay in the NLDS. It's the last time the Phillies saw the playoffs before this season, and then they just kind of went on a run. And Harper got hot. 5 home runs in the postseason. Rhys Hoskins, 5 home runs. Kyle Schwarber, 3. That's 3 of the top 5 guys in Major League Baseball in the postseason with 13 home runs. All right, those guys are doing what they're supposed to do. And despite Rhys, he might be the worst defensive first baseman I've ever seen. He did come through and hit some big home runs, but of course, none bigger than Harper. The heartbeat and the blood of the team runs through Bryce Harper, and what he did the other night was just spectacular. And, so here we are. And I would have liked it if the World Series started a lot sooner because, the team with the mojo, you saw what happened to the Braves and the Dodgers with too much time off. I'm not sure if that's a real thing, but it kind of dies down. And can you pick that momentum up again? I don't know. We're going to find out.
Well, again, and I hate to say this, Joe, but another team that comes to mind as far as a team that got super hot, and then I think they had to sit a little bit long after wrapping up the pennant, the 07 Colorado Rockies. That's another team that a lot of people are drawing comparisons to. So, yes, I hope for your sake that turns out not to be the case. Ken, I want to ask you on something that Joe said there with your background now, 50 years plus, Ken, I understand in terms of coaching, playing back in the day, etc., in baseball. This thing about the defense and that Philly is objectively by the numbers an execrable defensive team, and Houston is pretty dadgum good defensively. In terms of the degree to which you, from your longtime coaching perspective, would value that as being a big factor in the series?
Absolutely, yeah. As you probably both know, and a lot of baseball fans know this, but baseball, the defense takes care of the ball. It's not like basketball or anything else where the offense hasn't. So defense is a premium. One thing was, as I was listening to Joe, Rick, I hate to take this to a different direction here, but I was watching a show today on the MLB Network, and they were talking about Mike Schmidt was being interviewed, and he had said that the catalyst for the Phillies was Pete Rose on that team. They were just kind of moving around, which kind of Joe, you were saying. They've kind of been hanging around. And when you said that, it just tripped the trigger with me. Schmidt said, yeah, I don't know if it was all Pete Rose, but he had so much to say positive about each one of us, kept us up, kept us going. My question to both of you, I guess, is who would be the catalyst on this team for the Phillies?
I'm going to let Joe go first. I'm going to cheat.
Well, no, that's okay. I don't think they have a Pete Rose because, you're right, Ken. Until Pete got here, they couldn't get out of the NLCS. They lost to the Big Red Machine in 76 and the Dodgers in back-to-back series, and the Pirates ended up coming back from 3-1 to beat the O's in 79. Then they bring in Pete Rose, and he was the difference. He really was. And to a man, you know, Schmidt might have said that, but and ask Boa, ask Bake McBride, ask all those guys. You know, I know Pete's much maligned, you know, nationally, but he really was the key element to coming into this team, to bringing them a World Series. You know, they didn't do a lot at the trade deadline. They didn't bring in, you know, too much in here this year. To me, it's going to be Harper. It's just going to be, you know, follow leader. And Schmidt was the MVP of the World Series in 1980. So as much as Pete Rose was the catalyst all year and might have gotten him over the hump, he also had a big home run in extra innings in Montreal and Jerry Park in 80 to get them to pass the Expos to win the NL East, to get them into the playoffs. And if you recall, it was maybe one of the greatest series I've ever seen. It was a 5-game series in the NLS against Houston, where they had to come back from 2 games to 1 down, and they won 4 games in extra innings. It was just an amazing series to get them to the World Series. But I don't think they have a Pete, but they have a Bryce, and I think they're just going to have to, you know, follow the leader, and the leader is going to have to continue to do what he's been doing.
Well, as lame as it sounds, that was going to be my answer, is that I go back to just in looking at the home run that won the pennant this past Sunday and the way that everyone rallied around to him, that he may not have the same kind of vocal leadership as Pete Rose, or the same kind of, this sounds weird because I'm not sure Pete Rose is somebody that we would associate the term, because it's a new age term, emotional intelligence, but it sounds like Pete Rose had a pretty good amount of emotional intelligence for the time, as far as how to deal with people and get the most out of his teammates. And that Bryce Harper, just based on his greatness, just on the whole thing of like, climb on my back, I'll carry you there, I would kind of get that sense from him. And that 1980 series, yes, a truly, truly great one. I understand you were saying before, Ken, they're re-showing it on the MLB network, so I'm going to have to duck in at some point and watch some of that.
Is that right? Oh, it was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, good times. And again, every time Houston gets to the World Series, it seems, maybe not quite every time, but I mean, they had a lot of postseason history with Atlanta when they and then they faced them in the World Series last year. So these are the things that happen when you switch leagues, and it's similar to St. Louis and Milwaukee, albeit when they met in the 2011 National League Championship Series. That was after they met in the 82 World Series, so that was kind of backwards from what this is. But 2 teams in the same circuit for the bulk of both of their histories. I'm just going to go down this briefly here and get a sense from you guys on the numbers here from the FDH end of regular season breakdown, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. This is just a kind of compilation of numbers here, and then all kind of put in a blender at the end for an overall ranking. Coming into the playoffs, on the overall ranking in baseball, Houston was in 3rd place behind the Dodgers and Yankees, and Philly was tied for 8th with Seattle and Cleveland points-wise. In our end-of-season power rankings, we had Houston 3rd and Philadelphia 12th, actually. OBP, and again, Houston wins in all of these categories. Spoiler alert, OBP, Houston 7, Philadelphia 12. In OPS Plus, Houston 7, Philadelphia 8. FIP, Houston 1, Philadelphia 7. ERA Plus, Houston 2, Philadelphia 12. In the Pythagorean record, Houston 3rd, Philadelphia 11th. SRS, Houston 3rd, Philadelphia 10th. Run differential, Houston 3rd, Philadelphia 10th. So, again, very daunting, at least on paper, Joe. Again, these numbers don't tell us anything that the media is not already saying and talking about here, as far as, A, the juggernaut notion of the Astros, and going up against, as you said, a team with a win differential that is kind of historic for a World Series meeting. I suppose what all of this rests on, if you're a Philadelphia guy at this point, is, and there is a validity to this, of you throw out essentially everything that happened when Girardi was still the manager, because quite frankly, that incarnation of this team wasn't going to the playoffs, much less the World Series. So if you were to compare the teams from the point of Rob Thompson becoming manager, those numbers would be much closer than the ones I just read off, and therein, I guess, probably lies all the hope from everybody from Philadelphia.
Well, yeah, it just wasn't working with Girardi. I mean, the team was completely flat, and I know, it's different than other sports. Like in hockey, I think a coach makes a difference. He's much more vocal, can figure out the lines or match other lines, and obviously football, it's ultra important. In baseball, I think it was, I don't know if it was Whitey Ford, the manager might make the difference in like 6 or 7 wins or losses throughout the year. But they instantly just caught fire when he was gone. So I don't know if there's something to it. A lot of the players, to a man, said that basically they could be themselves a little bit more. And Joe Girardi is a good dude. He's not a bad guy. I think he was just very aloof with his players, whereas the assistants get to be, all friendly with the players, and they usually complain to him about the head coach or the manager and whatnot. But even when he became the manager, he was still open to a policy. I mean, he'd take guys behind the scenes and have a chat with them, but it was the way he did it. It kind of made them feel like he had their backs, and they started playing a lot looser and a lot better. And it was amazing because I remember thinking this probably isn't going to make a big difference because they've tried and tweaked with this team for years since Harper got here and even before, and they haven't been able to find a chemistry. And, there's not a lot of personality on the team, and folks around here think, well, it's not a very likable team. It's not a dislikable team, but there's nothing like the 93 team. They were just, long hair and, beer bellies, and just everyone had an off-the-hook year. And around here, there's just not a lot of connection with the players, and then it just took off. But then again, September happened. It was like, here we go again. They got swept by the Cubs in Chicago late, and they had to have Milwaukee, I think lose 3 or 4 or maybe 3 straight to the Marlins at home. They were the only team playing worse than the Phillies at the time. But once they got in, again, once you're in, you can't win it unless you're in it. They got in it, and they got hot, and things changed. The whole new season, everything else is forgotten. The 87 wins, notwithstanding, they're hot right now. So I wouldn't want to face them. But again, Houston, I mean, from top to bottom, I'm amazed they haven't won more championships. And I know they're vilified from 2017, and I have to get this in because Callis texted me and said, he wanted me to call them the cheaters. He says it every time the word Houston comes up.
Yeah.
Now, he'll never get over that. But I'm like, I understand that, Steve, but they're still the best team I've seen in the last 5 years. They keep reloading and retooling, but they haven't been able to. I think they've left some on the table. I'm looking at Justin Verlander's. The starting pitchers came out, and we were all wondering, well, it's going to be Wheeler and Nola, your first two, your top guns. But they went. Rob Thompson's going with Nola in Game 1 versus Verlander. Verlander's 15-11 in the postseason with a 3 points. 3.55 ERA, but in the World Series, 0 for 6 with 0 and 6 with a 5.68 ERA, 24 earned runs, 35 hits. So, I don't know if that means anything because again, you throw all that out, but it's not like he's Sandy Koufax or anything, or hasn't been in the World Series for whatever reason. You don't know why Clayton Kershaw. Or Peyton Manning never came up really huge and was dominant in the postseason, but were dominant regular season players. So it gives Philly a little bit of hope at least because, if you go down 0-2 to Houston with your top 2 guns, you're going to have some problems. You might not get back to Houston.
Very much so, and again, I want to ask Ken his thoughts on the managerial change, but I have a follow-up question based on something that you were talking about there with the makeup of this Philadelphia team, and that being, I spend a decent amount of time this year preparing for segments like this on Baseball Reference. I hate to bury them by saying I'm disappointed they don't have a World Series page up yet, but just in looking at the 2 teams individually, and I've been looking at the teams back through the last couple of rounds here. And what struck me about Philadelphia is, and reading articles in recent days about how they somewhat kind of followed in the footsteps in the 2010s of the Cubs and the Astros as far as trying to do a full-scale rebuild, tear-down rebuild. Looking just at the age of the players on this team, and it's a thing where a lot of late 20s, early 30s, and it's a thing where they're sort of like late bloomers as far as a rebuild goes. There were, I'm sure, a lot of people that were ready to write them off at this point as far as like, okay, well, this didn't work, and the Braves and the Mets are ascendant in this division here. But it's the story of the rebuild team that, like, eventually, after a number of years, finally did make it as far as they were supposed to make it.
You're right about that, and that's why I think everyone's been so disappointed. Rick, it never really happened, and a lot of it came down to starting pitching. Aaron Nola out of LSU, they re-signed him, gave him a nice contract a couple of years ago. It was very team-friendly, and then he tanked. He just tanked. He certainly wasn't the guy who earned that contract. They bring in Zach Wheeler, which I thought was a great acquisition. And to me, he turned out to be the ace of the team, and we've seen that in the postseason. Again, they came together. Nola, two of his three starts, he was brilliant. And, he lost the 4-run lead in his third start against the Padres, but Wheeler's ERA is 1.78, and they're hoping that Nola, if he starts, this was interesting because on 4 days rest, if he pitches game 1 and 4, he's going to be on 4 days rest instead of 2 and 5, I think, which would have been, or 2 and 6, which would have been 5 days rest. He's much better on that extra day of rest, but this is the way that Rob Thompson went. Aaron Nola didn't, he's had a little bit more time off since that 4-run deficit he gave up to the Padres. So he's going with him against Verlander. And we shall see. But you're right. It's a team that really, even the regular season, this didn't look like a team that was heading anywhere. They were, again, tanking in September for some reason. But, hey, you never know what turns a team around. Or I still think it was the 9th inning of the first game in St. Louis where they put up 6 runs. And, stunned the Cardinals fans, came back the next night, took that series, and then, took the Braves, and I'm not going to say easily, but, pretty handily. I know they lost game 2-3-0, but they came back at home, and they've been phenomenal at home, Citizens Bank Park. Fans are behind them, and, there's that mojo going, and it looks like the team has really come together. And the pitching, again, it's not just, let's ride a wave. The pitching really has been phenomenal. Ranger Suarez has done a great job. He even came in to close out the Padres the other day after he started a few days earlier and did a great job in his second start in the postseason. But once you get to the tail end, then it's like, who knows? But the closing, Sir Anthony Dominguez has been very good too. Sans the 3 wild pitches the other day, he's been very good. He's given up 1 run, and that only run in 15 innings was, the wild pitch the other day against the Padres. So, they seem like they're all coming together at the right time. They all have a lot of confidence. They're not scared by, that no one got freaked by the lights or the big stage. So not a ton of World Series experience on this team. In fact, Gene Segura went like 1,900 games without a World Series or postseason appearance. He's been playing great. And Nick Castellanos had a very disappointing year here, coming in, with expectations of being a much better hitter. But again, he stole a game in Atlanta, or was it St. Louis, I think, making some defensive stops and a couple big hits and a lot of 2-out hits. The team's just doing timely things, and they're doing things the correct way. Now, you'll see from time to time they look like, Walter Matthau sitting there on the bench, with some of the way they play defense. But they've been able to kind of recover from some of that by some timely hitting and some big home runs.
Very much so, yes. And as I said, I want to circle here to you, Ken, to get your thoughts on a managerial change and what that can do as far as the culture of a ball club. That part of it is kind of evident. The defense has not appreciably gotten better since then, but many of the other elements have reverted to the predicted form as far as everything that Philadelphia was supposed to do, pitching and offensively. So thoughts on that, Ken, from your time, from your experience in baseball, what that kind of a move from one manager to somebody that comes in and has the Midas touch?
Well, it's a crapshoot, in my opinion. I like Girardi. I think he's going to be – I hope he goes back and becomes a manager for somebody else, because I think he's a good mind. I think he's a good manager. I seem to think – and like I said, you don't know what's going to turn a team around. As I'm listening again to Joe and you again, Rick, it's, to me, watching the series leading up to this World Series, I think the Philly fans are feeding these guys on the Phillies team. They're responding to the fans more so than I think, and maybe this is just me and Steve Callis with the Astros. Going back to that, a little bit of that, not as much as Steve, because the Astros check all the boxes for me. I mean, it's just, they're in a class by themselves, which can be good and can be bad for them. And that's why I was watching the Phillies fans. They seem to be really, really, really into this. And I think that the players are feeding off that stuff. Because listening to Joe, and maybe I misunderstood you, but the fans were kind of down, and now
yes,
I would never know that by what I've seen in the last 2 series.
Totally flipped around. And it's such a tight place, Citizens Bank Park. You're right on top of everything. The place shook when Harper hit that home run. Shook.
Yeah, and I can believe that because I just watched that, and I see, not that Houston's complacent. They're not. They're just the creme de la creme right now. Right. But we've seen, all of us have seen over the years, teams like, I'm dating myself here, Willie Mays and the Giants upsetting the Indians.
Yeah.
The 60s Pirates, the Miracle Mets, the Tigers down to the Cardinals with Bob Gibson on the mound. The Red Sox coming back from 3-0 against the Yankees. And maybe this is just me, and Rick, you know this better than anybody. Every once in a while, I put on these rose-tinted glasses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's this way. I'm really feeling something here, and maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid. But I'm looking at little things here and there. Like I said, I think the fans are into it. If they can keep that mojo going, like what I've seen from over here in Cleveland on my television, it's like, wow, there's a difference. These folks are really, really into it. And, Philadelphia has a history of being not so nice to their teams.
Well, yeah. And here's the thing, Ken, as far as you being surprised about the reaction of people in Philly when they had been a little bit more dormant when the team was going poorly, let me split the atom and give you some untold wisdom that the world's never heard before. Everyone loves a winner, Ken. There you go. All right? Everyone loves a winner. And that's how we get to that part of the equation. I want to ask you a quick follow-up on that here, too, as far as managerially. The one thing, and even for the people who really loathe Houston, and I've never really fallen into that boat the way that some people have, so I don't have any kind of inhibitions there. I mean, of the three of you guys, I'm by far the least hater, and I never understood the whole thing of, like, people in this town that would even root for, like, the Yankees and Red Sox over them in the playoffs. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, and first of all, again, Boston cheated. That was on the record. And the Yankees basically cheated as well. It's come out what they did with their video room and everything. So everybody's hands are dirty on that. But
I'm with you. Sorry, I'm with you, Rick. I don't hate the Astros like everyone else. There's so much hatred. My cousin, female, chimed in. I don't think she even watches baseball. She's like, yeah, she lives in Florida. She's like, yeah, I hate the Astros. Go Phillies. They cheated. I'm like, okay, everyone's still killing. Not me. I just think they're an awesome team. I don't know why they haven't won more, and it's going to be an uphill battle. Well, that doesn't bother me, because like you said, the other teams cheated too. They just didn't win a World Series.
Well, Joe, you're all good, Joe, because one of the house rules of this show is anyone is free to interrupt me anytime they want to agree with me on something. No, if you're agreeing with me as you were, then it's a plus. Actually, I count that as a plus. But it's a thing where, even for the people that hate Houston, it's a thing, Ken, where you got Dusty Baker over there who has had such an amazing career in baseball. And I would think that that's a mitigating factor for a lot of people because he's a very sympathetic figure. I mean, the number one reason he was hired in that situation is because he is synonymous with doing things the right way. He's old school. And I have to think that, there's a lot of guys like yourself, Ken, that have had their issues with Houston over a period of time. But by the same token, that has to lead to at least conflicted feelings because it's hard to root against Dusty Baker.
Well, like I said earlier in the conversation, they check all the boxes. And it used to be when I was growing up, it was the Yankees would take everybody's good players and just beat the snot out of everybody. Mm-hmm. So, no, Dusty Baker, and here again, we go back to Joe Girardi in my twisted world. And they had to have a new manager, and they had to clean this up from all the the hate from not only just fans, but from other teams that they allegedly they were robbed of World Series because of those shenanigans. But Dusty Baker is definitely, I hope, wins this thing. Because for the fact that he's been such a good ball player, and now he's taken over this team and he's turned it around. He's done a facelift.
Yes. Yeah, because if you go back to 2020, I think they were, 29-31 going into the playoffs. And the fact that they won the pennant came as a surprise to a number of people based on that. There was the sense that based on some of the players that had already left, that maybe their best days had already come and gone. And they haven't won a World Series in the last couple of years, but yes, they have only 5 players left from the 2017 World Series winning team. That shows you how they've been able to rebuild on the fly, and that again,
amazing.
And there's a case that this is the most dominant of the Astros teams, and I think if they win the World Series, we would be hard pressed to deny that it is the most dominant of those teams. So, for something like this, and kind of come into this, in recent years in different sports, doing previews of various finales here. Once in a while, you get these ones here. I mean, not to compare where the Phillies are at, Joe, to, let's say, my Cavs in the 2017 and 2018 NBA Finals, but I had to phrase it in a similar way. Construct a scenario if the big underdog wins, because I think that's the only prism that you can view this through, because we've already established in the course of our conversation, if it's head-to-head, I mean, at least on paper, it's a pretty good mismatch when you're looking at the defenses involved, the offensive depth, and the pitching depth here. So as far as for all of us here, let's go through and let's construct a scenario where Philly gets it done. I'll just throw out a couple of quick thoughts before I throw it to you, Joe, and I would say got to be a continuation of the timely hitting. I think, as drastic as it sounds, you got to get not only a split in Houston, but I think you got to finish it in Philly. I think you don't let it go back to Houston for games 6 and 7, because I think the home crowd really being that instrumental. And you saw some of the comebacks, the exciting comebacks at the end of the National League Championship Series, the way that the crowd was able to, I'm not going to say carry the team, because that probably wouldn't give them enough credit for what they did, but sort of be the wind beneath their wings, however you want to put it. Minimize the chances for the bad defense to come into play, and basically avoid the circumstances where the Phillies are having to go to some of the lesser lights in their pitching pen. And again, I think it's going to take a combination of all of these kind of things here. So, Joe, if you're getting the outcome you want in the end, what are some additional things you think that might come into play to make that happen?
Well, I think you're right, Rick. They have to end the series kind of quickly.
Yep.
I think the team with a much deeper pitching staff, it favors them over a longer series. I agree. Get it done in Philly. The fans here, I do think as Ken's make a big difference, to be honest. So they're going to have to get some unbelievable starting pitching, and they're going to have to continue to, if you look at the Yankees, I think that Altuve and his name escapes me. For the first 3 games, had 1 hit apiece. Yeah, and they still cruise, because they're really balanced top to bottom. And I think that you're going to need some help from Houston in terms of their pitching. I'm not going to say unraveling, but it needs to be one of those series where we're like, how'd that happen? Right. Like, I think back to the late 80s, early 90s, where the Oakland A's went to 3 consecutive World Series, probably should have won all 3 on paper. They lose to the Dodgers 4-1. That was the Kirk Gibson series where he hits that home run in Game 1. They win the next year with the Earthquake series. And then the very next year, again, a dominant A's team versus the Reds, they get swept. Yeah. Like, how's that happen? You know what I mean? It wasn't like Game 7 and blah, blah, blah. So it's going to have to be, I think they're going to have to get some help from Houston. Maybe Altuve and some of their stars need to struggle. And their pitching, maybe Verlander continues his World Series woes, because I think if they play like their ability, it's going to be really hard to knock them out. So I think they're going to need some help, but the Phillies just have to continue to do what they've been doing.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, Joe. I think it's going to take a confluence of not just a handful, but at least two handfuls probably of circumstances. And hey, based on what we've seen thus far, I mean, look, them beating Atlanta is not an upset on par with this, but it's not far from that. I mean, I kept watching that series like, okay, Atlanta's going to flip the switch any time now, and then it didn't happen. Now, best of five versus best of seven. Listen, I'm sure Philly wishes it was best of one, right? The shorter the series, the better.
Yep.
Make it
And
more
it quickly.
Yeah, make it more random. So Ken, any of your thoughts on this here too? I mean, if we're constructing this scenario where Philly can get it done, what are some elements that you're seeing? And from your time in the game and from everything you've seen in your decades of baseball, what it would take to make something like that happen?
Well, this is where I'm going to be the outlier again, and Rick, you know me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm left-handed, and I'm definitely left-handed because I think a little bit different than probably most people.
Okay, I do too. So that's good.
I don't think there's that big of a difference. I looked at the lineups today for both teams, up and down, and what they've done in these last two series, and throughout. And the biggest difference, the biggest thing that I think Houston has over them is they have more pitching depth.
Sure.
They all have good starters. I think if they get complacent and they go in there, now what they haven't lost in anything so far, Houston hasn't.
Right.
And they've been there before. Philly hasn't been there since 2009?
Right.
Yep, 2009, there's the last World Series. The Yankees beat them.
Yep. And so they're hungry, like I said, with the fans and stuff like that. I look at the starting lineups. Altuve didn't impress me at all, and some of those guys, but they do check all the boxes, and I'm giving the Astros that. But who cares about Dusty in Philly? Nobody cares about him.
Right.
These fans are into this, which means these players don't want to, and I know they're millionaires and this and that, but they don't want to let these people down.
Right.
And they're going to go in there with everything on the line, and they want to prove to these people in Philly that they really are for real. So, other than the pitching depth, I think these two teams are really evenly matched for the most part. The wild card for me is, and you guys know this as well as I do, there's always some knucklehead who comes out of nowhere.
Yep.
And you go, whoa, he turned this whole series around.
I mean,
David Freese in 2011. I always go back to David Freese and all those clutch hits he had against the Rangers in 2011. One of those guys.
Bill Mazeroski.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Denny McClain or Lolich and those guys. On and on.
Well, what about
the Mets?
What about Bader through the first couple rounds of the playoffs? He was like the Brian Doyle of this year for the Yankees. I was recalling some of that from back in the day. So, absolutely,
indeed.
that can kind of come into play a little bit here. And then the last factor that I'm thinking of here, I'm gonna run this by both of you guys, is motivationally. So for Houston, it's the fourth pennant in 6 years. And, they don't want to make it the third time in a row that they've made it to the World Series and lost out of those times. But, I mean, if you're Houston, you have a reasonably good expectation that you're going to be back. If not next year, the year after, whatever. You've still got a window. Versus for Philadelphia, again, this is kind of the rare instance of a rebuilding team that became like a veteran to young veteran team along the way. They're in a league with the Dodgers and the Braves. So it might be fraught, as well as the Mets, too. Let's throw them in there. Because the Phillies were third in the division. Boy, I can only imagine what Callis would be saying, purist that he is, that a third-place team is in the World Series. Although I think we all know. That's a rhetorical question, what he would say, right? But as far as it goes, for Philly, it's... If one team has a now or never sense, it's Philly. I mean, this is their moment.
Absolutely.
You got to seize this. You got to make it. You got to strike while the iron's hot. Because if you're Houston, you could be back in the next couple of years. not out of the realm of possibility that Philly would, but not the same odds as Houston, let's be honest. So how does that work psychologically there, Joe? Is that something that helps Philly, is knowing, beyond a shadow of a doubt motivationally that, like, we got to do it now, there is no tomorrow?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right, Rick. And I can never understand, and I always disagreed with this when I hear people talk about a major underdog saying they're playing with house money, they have nothing to lose. They have everything to lose. They have as much to lose as the Astros. What are you talking about?
Yes.
All right, it's the World Series. You don't get back there every year.
Right.
Phillies made that run back in the early 2000s, and they got one ring. They had the four-star, they had Halladay and Cliff Lee, Roy Oswalt, Cole Hamilton, and they never repeated. We think they left at least one ring on the table. It is tough to win for Houston, though. But I do think, yes, this is it. And I don't think they think this is house money. We have nothing to lose. I don't think that's good. They're going in with that mindset. But I think, hey, listen, guys, this was a magical run. This might not, you never know when something like this is going to happen again. Whereas Houston, yes, I think they might think that we're this good, we could be back. But I also think they want to get that 2017 monkey off their back. They've won one chip in the 6 times they've been to the ALCS, 4 times or 3, however many times they've been to the World Series. They won that year, and everyone, even they still go places and hear the cheating see the cheating signs and the snickers and the comments from opposing fans. I think they'd love to get it done without having that cheating aura around their neck. But it's 2 psychological things. You're right. I think it's now or never. But I think Houston wants to really kind of distance himself from that cheating ring that they've received in 2017.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point there. Ken, how do you see it as far as motivationally with these teams here and how both of them look at it? What are you thinking as far as that goes? That Philly probably has to be looking at it like we can't count on being back here at some point. Houston can't possibly be thinking that in their minds because the odds are they will. So how do you see that all shaking out for the psyches of both teams?
Well, like I said earlier, I think the motivation, if it can sustain itself, is on the Phillies side. They'll feed off that if that's to be continued. The Astros, they're like a 3-piece suit. They've got everything put together. They've got people coming up through the system, and they've been there before. And like you said, the number of times they've been there and haven't won it, that's their motivation. But are the fans complacent? I think they'll come back and pull for them. But I think that if a play has to be made, somebody has to dive and make a super play. I think the Phillies have that going for them because I think they're going to give it that extra effort. And both teams are going to play for it all, obviously. But that's how I see. I'm just, and I've surprised myself by saying this. No offense, Joe, but I didn't see the Phillies at all coming up.
No, me neither.
Like most people didn't. And now I see these things, the intangibles, that these guys are just, there's all kinds of stuff. I see Bryce Harper, who I thought was a very talented guy when he's with Washington and stuff like that, but I thought he was all about himself. But when I saw Schwarber hit that home run and his reaction, and everybody sees, and you hit on a point there that I brought up earlier, that he is the Pete Rose, because who looked at him and his expression when that home run was made? Mm-hmm. All his teammates. So they're feeding off him. I sound like I'm a Phillies homer, but
no, not at all. You're right about that face. They keep talking about that face around here, by the way, that face, and how, well, like you said, Ken, it kind of just feeds into he's part of, the team. He's not all about himself. And for what he was I was telling my kids this, such a jerk coming up when he was in the minors, blowing kisses to the pitcher when he hit a ball 550 feet. He turned into the most level team player, like great guy, great community, family man. I've never seen quite the turnaround when he came into the league. They love him around here.
Uh-huh.
Well, and everybody wants a leader too. Everybody wants a leader. Everybody wants to follow somebody, especially in these kind of things. Who's going to lead us? Who's going to say the right words at the right time? Who's going to go over and just like pump us up when we're down a little bit? Those kind of things. And those guys don't grow on trees. And I don't know who the leader is for Houston. They have several multi-talented players.
Yeah.
But so I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I just see things differently with this Phillies team.
I think it might be Bregman or Altuve or a combination, I think, because of their tenure there as far as being leaders. But so
Yep.
What I'm going to do here, so for wrap-up thoughts here, I'm going to start with you, Joe, as far as any other thoughts you have on this. And I'm going to exempt you, Joe, because of you being, in the market there, head versus heart. I'm not going to force a prediction out of you. Make one if you want to. I'm going to say Astros in 6. I think it is going to be a very competitive World Series. And, again, any other thoughts that you have on this, Joe?
The only thoughts I had in terms of a leader and being a leader, and Harper's really, come to the forefront as a leader. You have to perform to be a leader. It's not all about being verbal. Pete Rose performed. Correct. You remember that catch he had at the second out when Bob Boone drops the ball, he's right there, makes the play. Tim Tebow was here, got a cup of coffee with the Eagles as a third-string quarterback, and the boy can be a leader. Really? A guy who's not going to play can be a leader? No, the guy still – think of any team's leaders. There's guys who perform in big spots, in big moments, because, you go 0 for 25 in a postseason, who's going to be like, oh, let's follow that guy? No, you still have to perform on the field, and Harper's been doing it. Hoskins has been doing it. They've all kind of really have performed. But again, the leader, the heart and soul of this team runs through Bryce Harper, and it's going to have to if this continues. So I'm going to say if the Phillies do win, it's going to be one of those, what happened in the Astros, they win in 5. If the Astros win, it's going to be 6. Yeah,
I think that's entirely reasonable. I believe that completely. If Philly wins, it's in 5. Ken, any other thoughts of yours we didn't get to?
The thing that I would say is I think it's going to go 6 games. I don't have a horse in the race here. I get definitely up on the Phillies and definitely on to win, but I also wouldn't be ashamed by watching the better team win it for Dusty because again, that's baseball, and that's what's so nice about the game. The one thing I'll leave you both with, I think 6 games, and I'm just going to kind of say either way I'm fine with it because I think it's going to be a hell of a series, especially if the Phillies jump on them quick and take one in Houston right off the bat. That'll be a stunner for the Astros. I think so. The one thing on a side note, watching this 80s game, the NLCS in 1980, those uniforms were awesome.
Yes.
How great were they? Those were awesome.
Yes.
Oh.
Well, as
and
Ken
if
knows,
if you ever come to the part where Vern Rule, the pitcher, again, they don't have the replays like they do today, but it was a big controversy because he turned it into a triple play. It was a ball off the. I'm still mad about it because I think it bounced. But if you guys ever get a look at it, tell me what you think. Vern Rule turned a triple play out of, to me, was basically a ball that bounced in his glove. But see what you think if you ever come across it.
I will. Well, indeed.
Remarkable.
But, yeah.
Well, and as Ken knows, I have, largely because I drafted him and had him for 10 years in the keeper league that I'm in with Ken, I have a George Springer Astros rainbow jersey just because that is one of the most badass jerseys ever. Although,
yes, you do.
I'll tell you this, though, Joe. A lot of people put, at least on that same tier, Phillies Baby Blue as far as, the epic sports jerseys of all time. So,
I have my Gary Matthews. I have a Gary Matthews one from the 90s. I'm sorry, the 80s. Gary Matthews. Sarge.
Yeah.
Can we get a throwback game?
Right now?
We need to mandate at least one throwback game in this World Series,
right? You're right. That'd
Rainbow versus Baby Blue.
Those unis are sweet, guys. You're absolutely right.
They are.
Totally.
I'm watching this, and I'm like, man, oh man. And the other thing I like about the 80s, or compared to today, these umpires aren't You don't have to go to any damn phones or any of that stuff.
Right.
Yep.
It's like, Jesus, you want to slow the game down or speed it up? Cut that shit out. Pardon my language. You can
That's
delete
right.
that, Rick.
Well, you know what, Ken? With you saying that, I feel like Callis is here with us in spirit. With you making that crotchety point.
and I'm tipping my hat to that.
Exactly. Looking forward to getting Callis back on here. But I tell you what, in some form or fashion, this is a panel we have to revisit here. We have done some different sports and topics with both of you guys over a period of time here. So this was a fun panel, as I expected. And yes, we will have to reconstitute this at some point here. Thank you both so much for being a part of this thing here today. Ken Detwiler in for Steve Callis, our good friend Joe Staszak. Great FDH Lounge dignitaries. Thank you guys, and thank you everybody for joining us for FDH Lounge mini episode 1538.